For 408 days, Ukraine stands strong against the forces of the Russian invasion. Several sets of secret US documents regarding Ukraine, Middle East and China leaked online, reports Ukrainska Pravda. According to Reuters sources, the leaked documents were apparently modified to at least reduce the number of losses of Russian troops in the war in Ukraine. The US officials believe that Russia or pro-Russian elements are behind the leak. In turn, the Pentagon refused to comment on the authenticity of the leaked documents that also include some information on Ukraine's spring counteroffensive plans and noted that they were studying the issue. The agency is expected to investigate the cause of the leak. The documents mention the training of new brigades and the supply of weapons to Ukraine, but not specific plans of the offensive. Issue of preventing the leakage of information regarding the plans of the defense forces of Ukraine was discussed during the latest staff meeting headed by the President Volodymyr Zelensky. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky took part in Iftar, the fast-breaking evening meal of Muslims in Ramadan, and said that now it will be a tradition at the official level as well, reports Ukrinform. The event was hosted by the Crimean Tatars Center near Kyiv and was attended by Muslim soldiers, representatives of the diplomatic community and Muslim clergy. Later in his evening video address, the President of Ukraine said that the world should know respect and order will return to international relations only when the Ukrainian flag returns to Crimea, when there is freedom there, just like everywhere else in Ukraine. Zelensky assured that Ukraine is grateful to the Muslims of the country and the entire international Muslim community who, like Ukrainians, seek peace and protection from evil. Iftar is the fast-breaking meal of Muslims in Ramadan held at the local evening prayer time, reports Ukrainska Pravda. At the end of the 20th century, Muslims began to organize iftar in different countries, not only for Muslims. It is used to strengthen ties between representatives of different nationalities living in the country and familiarize themselves with Muslim traditions. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has offered Ukraine to cede the occupied Crimea Peninsula to the aggressor in order to end the war with Russia, reports Interfax Ukraine. According to him, Putin is not capable of capturing the entire Ukraine, and Zelensky also cannot expect to return everything, thus Crimea may be a solution. Spokesman for the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry Oleg Nikolenko said that Kyiv appreciates the efforts of the President of Brazil to find a solution to stop Russian aggression, but is forced to remind that it does not trade its territories. There is no legal, political or moral reason why we should cede at least a centimeter of Ukrainian land. The Ukrainian position remains unchanged. Any mediation efforts to restore peace in Ukraine must be based on respect for the sovereignty and full restoration of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter, stressed Nikolenko. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky informed that over $300 million have been collected with the help of the Ukrainian government charitable platform United 24 over 11 months of its operation, reports LBUA. Donations were received from more than 110 countries. Zelensky thanked all those who helped this initiative and said that Ukraine feels the support of the whole world in the fight for freedom and independence. Ukraine will temporarily stop exporting grain and sunflower seeds to Poland until the new season, reports Interfax Ukraine. This will be done to solve the problem of overstocking the Polish market with Ukrainian agricultural products, which caused protests of Polish farmers. At the same time, transit via Poland will continue. This solution was suggested by the Minister of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine, Mykola Solsky, and supported by his Polish colleague Robert Telus. Solsky said that if the world could put pressure on Russia to increase inspections of vessels in the Bosphorus, Ukraine would have been able to reduce the flow of grain through European countries. The same issues are occurring in other countries as well, for example in Romania, which asked the EU for support. Head of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate, Metropolitan Onufry, and over 20 other high-level clergymen have Russian citizenship, reports Ukrainska Pravda. According to the media investigation, the head of the Ukrainian part of the Russian Church has had a Russian passport since the 90s. Recently, Ukrainian authorities terminated the rental agreement with this church for one of the oldest monasteries in Ukraine, Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra. It started a series of such decisions of local authorities all over Ukraine. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church of Moscow Patriarchate calls it a violation of their liberties. In one of their churches, clergy of the Moscow Patriarchate have even beaten a Ukrainian veteran who protested against them.
One foreign tourist, we've been told by the Italian Foreign Ministry that he was an Italian national. He's been killed, 7 wounded in a suspected car ramming attack very close to the beach in a grassy park area that would have been packed at this time of day with religious holidays for Jews, Muslims and Christians taking place. So many tourists have flocked to Israel. Those injured, we're told, are all being treated in hospital in Tel Aviv. They range in age from their teens to their 70s. Now, this is a really quite unusual attack in that it involves tourists in such a number, although we have seen in recent weeks other attacks by Palestinians that have been carried out in the city.
And it followed an attack earlier in the day in which 2 British-Israeli sisters were killed.
That's correct. And this was on the road in the Jordan Valley in the north of the West Bank. It seems that a gunman opened fire on a car which had these 2 British Israeli sisters. They came from another settlement to the south of the West Bank. They were driving with their mother, we understand, on holiday for a Passover holiday to the Galilee in the north of Israel. Their mother has been seriously wounded. Now, there's been no immediate claim of responsibility for either attack, although there have been praise for these attacks from Palestinian militant groups in the Gaza Strip. And just to put this in perspective, of course, they're taking place, these attacks, hours after Israel carried out airstrikes both in Gaza and in the south of Lebanon in response to earlier rocket fire from the south of Lebanon, which it actually blamed on Palestinian militants.
Yeah, I mean, do we know if the 2 attacks were linked, or is it just coming against this backdrop of an increase in tensions?
I mean, at the moment, we can only say that it is coming against this backdrop of very high tensions, both with the overlapping religious holidays, but also there has been these 2 nights of real violence at Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque when it was stormed by Israeli police. They say that they were acting to stop masked agitators who'd barricaded themselves inside the mosque. Palestinians say that the Israeli police had no right to be there. We saw social media footage shared of police beating Palestinians with sticks inside the mosque, and in one case appearing to use a rifle butt to beat Palestinians. Those have caused outrage, really, across the region.
Yolanda Nell in Jerusalem speaking to my colleague Oliver Conway. And Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht is spokesperson for the Israeli Defence Force. He told the BBC's Julian Marshall that they were hoping to de-escalate the situation. And as long as things remained quiet, Israel wasn't planning further retaliatory strikes. He was speaking before the latest attack in Tel Aviv.
We had 2 very bad days where basically there was a convergence of 3 arenas which kicked off in Jerusalem, to Gaza, and after that to Lebanon. And we were under attack by Hamas and Iran.
I mean, you conflated the 2 there. You've said Hamas and Iran. What's your evidence for that?
Iran has been sending its tentacles all over the region. They've been supporting Hamas. They've been supporting also Lebanese Hezbollah. It's something that they've been inciting for years.
I mean, there's been a suggestion that if indeed Iran is involved in those attacks from Lebanon, what they were doing was striking back in retaliation for Israeli strikes against Iranian targets in Syria. Do you find that plausible?
I wouldn't draw a direct line. I would say that Iran is more sort of behind the scenes. We were very focused directly on Hamas and to basically put out the targets we were focused on south of Tyre, where areas where the launches were coming from.
I know you were aware of what targets you hit in southern Lebanon.
So it was mainly launching areas and things that were involved directly in the launches towards Israel.
And it was Hamas, was it, rather than Hezbollah?
It was Hamas, correct. That's why you didn't hear us talking about Hezbollah. I'm sure that Hezbollah were aware of it and Iran were behind the scenes, but it was directly Hamas.
So you sound very confident that you can now put a cap on this for the moment.
That's our hope. I mean, there's a certain language and a certain threshold, which is for people that are, an old soldier like myself, you understand it. Also where the rockets fail, how far we went out. We are looking for this event. If it stays quiet, we're hoping it to stay quiet. Again, we're ready. Temple Mount this morning was quiet. Sadly, we had a treacherous attack in our Jordan Valley where 2 ladies were shot at from a family in a stakeout. Again, Judea and Samaria right now is also very volatile.
Trying to calm things down at this particular point, but I just wondered whether, on reflection, you felt that Israeli riot police had used heavy-handed tactics when they stormed the prayer hall of Al-Aqsa Mosque in a pre-dawn Wednesday raid.
There was a narrative of saying they barricaded themselves inside the mosque. They weren't barricading, because if they were barricading, we'd say, let it die a natural death. They were preparing to storm tourist people coming to worship on the mountain. There's a status quo during Passover, which is very sensitive in timeline, where there's a 4-hour window where people who are not Muslim can come and be on the mountain. The rioters that were inside the mosque were preparing to storm these worshippers. The police went in at night to prevent this from happening in daytime. And again, I'm aware that the visual coming out from one side was harsh.
It was very, very harsh. I mean, the attacks on the worshippers really were very brutal from those images.
Yes, but also if you saw our police head cameras, there was another perspective of that. I don't want to talk to the police, and I'm aware how much these pictures were problematic, and maybe we can leave it at that.
Lieutenant Colonel Richard Hecht. In our earlier podcast, we heard about the planned resumption of diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran. Now there are reports of what could be equally momentous, this time the end to an 8-year bloody civil war between the Saudi-backed government in Yemen and Houthi rebels supported indirectly by Iran. Our Arab Affairs editor, Sebastian Usher, explains that a possible breakthrough in Yemen is connected to the strengthening of relations between the Iranians and the Saudis.
The moment that it began to be clear that Iran and Saudi Arabia were trying to bury the overt hostility that's played out across the region for the past 7 or 8 years, speculation was about what effect will it have on Yemen. Because, I mean, Yemen's reached a stage of stalemate in many ways. The war, the UAE, which was as involved as Saudi Arabia at one point, has pretty much pulled out. The Saudis clearly want a way out. The Houthis, they're there, they're not going anywhere, but they may be open for a deal. So I think this was a door that was already kind of open, and this is a way in. Iran and Saudi Arabia, I mean, this was a proxy battlefield for them, amongst others, in the region. The Saudis obviously much more deeply involved. Iran, in a sense, had a very good deal there. The Houthis could essentially battle themselves, but with extra support from Iran. So Iran got a lot of bang for its buck from this. But both sides now seem to be moving on, trying to look for a recalibration of relations across the region.
Can you remind us of the origins of this civil war and paint a picture of how awful it's been?
Well, I mean, to get into the origins could go a bit far back. I mean, Yemen has been in a state of flux and chaos for a long time. After the Arab uprisings in 2011, the long-term president was finally forced out. And the Houthis essentially took advantage of that at a certain point. They kept on pushing and pushing, and suddenly the government was driven out, went to Saudi Arabia, took refuge there. The Saudis then, 8 years ago, intervened militarily. I think they were expecting, under Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, de facto all of it, a quick push would do it. Obviously, that hasn't been the case. And the result has been what the UN has described as, the most devastating catastrophe, essentially, in recent history. 80% of the population is needing aid. Tens of thousands of people have died directly or indirectly from the war. As I say, it's a war that just hasn't been going anywhere. I mean, no one is likely to win it. Even if there is a deal, though, that's agreed, I mean, the problem is that the issues that existed before it erupted into this bigger conflict will still be there. So Yemen isn't suddenly going to return to some state where there wasn't chaos before. It was chaos and it got worse.
Sebastian Usher. Russian state media say investigators have formally charged the Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich of spying for the United States. The TASS news agency said that he had categorically denied the accusations. Sarah Rainsford reports.
It's more than a week since the journalist Evan Gershkovich was arrested in Ekaterinburg, a move which his newspaper, The Wall Street Journal, has condemned and that the State Department has demanded be overturned. Mr. Gershkovich was detained whilst on a reporting trip in Russia and accused of spying. He's now been formally charged, although no evidence at all has been presented, and his friends and colleagues are sure he's been targeted for his journalism. Russia has crushed all independent local media in recent years, and when Vladimir Putin ordered the full-on invasion of Ukraine, he introduced tight censorship, making reporting from Russia far tougher, even for foreign correspondents there.
Sarah Rainsford. The issue of transgender rights is back in focus in the United States after Nike agreed a promotional partnership with the American trans influencer and TikTok star Dylan Mulvaney. Here's a clip from one of the sponsored posts on Instagram which shows Dylan doing aerobics in a sports bra and leggings.
What's some other workout stuff?
High knees.
Our reporter Naomi Choi Smith told us more about Dylan Mulvaney and her latest partnership.
Dylan Mulvaney is a huge social media star. We're talking 11 million followers on TikTok. And she actually got her start on social media after the pandemic. She found herself unemployed. She was in some musicals and she found she didn't have a job, and she turned to social media and she became immensely popular. And since then, she's garnered the interest of all kinds of brands, from Kate Spade to Crest. And now most recently, she's drawn the attention of Nike, and she's been modeling their sports bras and their leggings in their most recent sponsorship, which has, of course, created this online uproar and controversy that we're talking about today.
Now, the Nike deal has come at a very tense time. The sporting world is still trying to navigate the transgender issue, especially for athletes.
That's right. And the World Athletics Body announced, in fact, just last month, that transgender women who have been through male puberty can no longer compete in women's events. And this is still a big issue. You know, as you mentioned, several sports bodies have moved in that general direction, but it's still a very controversial and contentious issue. And Nike has perhaps unwittingly, or some on the more cynical side, say they knowingly walked into this debate. Some are claiming that any publicity is good publicity, but with the vitriol that's been expressed online and some of these hateful comments, Nike is trying to distance itself from the backlash. They've said recently, keep your comments, please, constructive. They want to embrace diversity and inclusion. So they're trying to distance themselves from that controversy and that topic.
But there certainly has been an online backlash to this. What has Dylan Mulvaney said, or the trans community, in response to that negative backlash?
Well, Dylan hasn't actually made any public comments in direct response to this controversy, but the trans community has largely rushed to defend her, saying this is about inclusion and representation and self-identifying. But on the other side, you do have people in the transgender community like Caitlyn Jenner, the former track star, who you may know from Keeping Up with the Kardashians, who has actually come out to say that she doesn't believe this is the right kind of person to put in an advert for women's clothing. So you do have very diverse opinions, even within the trans community. That being said, there's been a lot of support online for Dylan from the trans community and elsewhere as she faces this backlash and some very hateful and vitriolic comments online.
Poland says Ukraine has proposed to limit or even suspend its large-scale grain exports to Poland after it emerged that those exports pushed down prices for Polish farmers. Poland's Agriculture Minister Robert Telus was speaking after a meeting with his Ukrainian counterpart. Adam Easton reports from Warsaw.
Mr. Telus said the temporary suspension of exports would not apply to grain transiting Poland to other markets. When Russia blockaded Ukraine's Black Sea ports, some feared the grain shortage could cause famine in traditional export markets in Africa. The EU was keen to use Poland as a new transit route, but the lack of storage and loading infrastructure required to handle the grain influx led to millions of tons remaining in the country. With a general election looming, the government, which draws much support from the countryside, was keen to resolve the issue quickly.
Adam Easton. Well, over the past few weeks, we've heard much speculation about when Ukraine might launch a counter-offensive to try to retake land seized by Russian forces. So there was much interest when the New York Times reported on Thursday that Western plans to aid the Ukrainian military had been leaked and published on social media. The paper said the Pentagon was investigating who might have leaked the documents, some of which appear to have been modified. On Friday, though, both the Ukrainians and the Russians suggested the leak of the plans might be part of a disinformation effort by the other side. Our correspondent in Kyiv, Hugo Beshega, told us what is known about the documents.
There's so many questions in the story. Nothing has been officially confirmed, at least publicly. So we're talking about documents that appear to be documents with US and NATO plans to help the Ukrainian military in this much anticipated counteroffensive. Now, these documents first appeared as photographs and they were posted on social media, and they're still there. And these pictures include charts with dates of when weapons are expected to be delivered to the Ukrainians. Also, the sizes of Ukrainian military units. I've got to say, we haven't been able to verify the pictures or the authenticity of these documents. But there is another intriguing element here, because in one of those pictures, some details appear to have been modified. They overstate estimates of Ukrainian military losses in the war, and they understate the number of Russian troops killed. So there's a lot of mystery involving these alleged documents and this alleged leak of information.
And the Russians say it's Ukrainian disinformation, and the Ukrainians say it's Russian disinformation.
Yeah, I think we're used to claims and counterclaims in this war. So no surprise that the Russians are saying something and the Ukrainians are saying something different. So here in Kyiv, an advisor to President Zelensky told me that this apparent leak was part of a disinformation effort by Moscow, and he obviously pointed out that some of the information that had apparently been modified. And in Russia, there are similar claims posted on a channel, on a Telegram channel used by military bloggers, said that this could have been part of a Western plot to mislead Russian commanders. So they're perhaps a little bit skeptical as well. But what is interesting is that there was another person, a spokesperson for the Ukrainian military intelligence, said that it was possible that the information in these posts on social media was entirely fake and that there had been no leak. So the mystery continues.
Hugo Beshega. Our next story is about a Russian activist, film director, and one of the members of the controversial protest band Pussy Riot. Anna Kuzminik is on the Russian federal wanted list. She faced criminal investigations from the Russian authorities after burning Vladimir Putin's effigy.